All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Daily December 2022, day 24. It is Christmas Eve, folks. For those of you that celebrate Christmas, I hope your Christmas Eve is being pleasant. For those of you that don't celebrate Christmas, I hope the holiday season is being pleasant to you. And for people that don't celebrate any holidays, I hope winter is being pleasant to you. Because unfortunately, right now, winter is not being pleasant to a lot of people. Because I heard the term snowstorm of a generation thrown around. Because for anyone that doesn't know, the Midwest and basically kind of the northern half of the U.S. has been hit by this massive, massive winter storm that I think even has a name. Like it's big enough that it has a name that I can't remember. And people have been throwing around, oh, it's the snowstorm of a generation. Well, I've actually lived through the snowstorm of a generation as about 10 years ago. And I at that particular point, I was doing direct sales, and the job that I had me working in where was it? Sheboygan. I was working in Sheboygan, which, due to where I was living at the time, was effectively 100-mile commute into work, because driving there directly was not something that was very wise because of the time of the season. So I had to take the interstates, which had me driving all the way into downtown Milwaukee and then all the way up I-43. So I was working in Sheboygan. I got done with my shift at like 9 or 10 o'clock at the night. I'm driving my way home, and it is the snowstorm of a generation. And I was driving about 2 miles an hour on an interstate. Could see barely 2 feet in front of my car and was terrified. So I remember that generational storm very, very well. And we called that snowstorm of generation then. I really think the term snowstorm of a generation is starting to lose its meaning, unless generations now means 10 years. And if you're having a new generation in 10 years, there is something wrong. 10-year-olds should not be starting a new generation. Let's wait till they're like at least 18, 20, maybe 25. Like let's go generations 25-year gaps instead of 10. Anyway, so what I wanted to talk about today is actually inspired by a comment I had in one of my other videos. And some of you may be confused because it looks like we're building another D&D 4e character. And technically, we're going to be doing that, but I'm going to be using it to highlight why I am 100% convinced now that D&D, or 1D&D, is D&D 5.5. Because 1D&D is following the same train of thought and the same motivations that what was called the Essentials series in 4th edition followed. Like it's the parallels are so close that this feels like I would not be surprised if when 1D&D came out they used the word essential in the title. Other than the fact that the Essential series has a bad name, but Wizards of the Coast has for some odd reason decided that bad names are not a thing. 1D&D and D&D Next. So maybe they will call it Essentials again, because this is exactly what it is. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to be talking about what the Essentials series was, and we're actually going to build what's called a knight in 4th edition. A knight is a version of the fighter. Remember, we've made 2 fighters already. A knight is the version of the fighter that showed up in what was called, the book itself was called Player Essentials 1. And that's why this is called the Essentials series. And what it was the Essentials version of the fighter. And the thing that defined the Essentials series was there was significantly less choices you had to make. As you leveled up, you were just given certain powers instead of having to choose powers. Powers you had at level 1 would just become more and more powerful instead of having to choose new ones and replace them eventually. Or you would get more uses of encounter powers, things like that. Everything was made to be significantly more simple, more streamlined, specifically because they had gotten to a point in 4th edition where rules bloat had made getting into 4E very, very difficult, especially since by the time the Essentials series came out, the predominant way that you got into 4th edition was not by going to your local game store and buying a bunch of books. You would go to D&D Insider, which is what their online tools was called. And you would sign up for an Insider account. It was about $10 a month, and it gave you access to the full text of every book in the game. And it also gave you access to a ton of things. The one that most people used was the character builder, which is what I use here. They had an offline version of it, and that's what I use here. They had an online character builder. They had combat encounter builders, very similar to D&D Beyond, where they have like one in beta right now, where it's an encounter builder. They had an encounter builder. They had a monster builder in there where you could create your own monsters or modify monsters that already exist. That's not something they really have they have something kind of like that in the D&D Beyond, where you can make your own monsters and you can modify ones that already exist. It's not nearly as robust as the one on D&D Insider. So yeah, because that was what most people were doing, because it was significantly easier than opening up a book and having to copy your powers down and things like that, or having to buy, because they had power cards that you could buy, but with D&D Insider, it would do all your math for you. So you wouldn't have to figure out what all your different bonuses were and make sure you were using the right bonuses in the right spots. The character builder did all that for you. So because of that, when a new player came in, they would be, well, let's just go here. They would be presented with this. You can see there's tons of stuff here, and it looks overwhelming. And then they'd go, well, I wanna be a fighter. Okay, well, I choose the fighter. Well, now look at all this other stuff I have to do. This is so confusing. So the Essentials, you'll see Players Essentials 2, Players Essentials 1, Players Essentials. This is Heroes of something. It's probably Heroes of the Shadowfell. There's a couple books that were just called Heroes of the Feywild or Heroes of the Shadowfell that were part of the Essentials series. But if you look at the knight here, choose the knight, I only have one choice to make. I have Shield Finesse, which gives me the Shield Finesse feat. And there it is, Player Essentials, Heroes of Fallen Lands. Or Spinning Deflection. While you're wielding a quarterstaff, you're considered to be wielding a shield for powers and effects that require you to wield one. So this effectively allows you to create a staff-wielding fighter, which I think is amazing, and I think it's super cool. So, as you can see, the amount of choices you have to make is significantly limited. So I'm going to choose Spinning Deflection. I'm going to go next. I'm going to choose race. I'm actually going to choose a race that is 100% not built for the fighter, because it doesn't give you a bonus to strength or constitution, but there's a reason, and I will explain in a little bit here. So I'm going to choose the Eladrin. Eladrin was my favorite race in 4th edition because of this. Phase Step is an encounter ability, so you could use it every combat. For your move action, you could teleport up to 5 squares. So you just had a free teleport, and it was massively fun. I loved Eladrin. So we're going to choose Eladrin. And then you could go all these different flavors of Eladrin. We're just going to go standard. Go next. And then we don't do themes because that's confusing. We're going to auto pick. So again, even without me having a +2 intelligence, without me having a bonus to strength or con, I still have an 18 strength. I still have a 14 con. Both of those are really good. And then I also just happen to have a 12 intelligence and a 10 charisma. I have no negative scores. So it's not horrible. So it didn't really hurt the character almost at all because I went through this before just so I could remember how all this stuff works. And I made a dwarf which gets both strength and con, and my scores were 18 strength, 16 constitution. So the difference between a character, a race that gave you everything you could want for your class and one that gave you nothing was 1 ability modifier. That's it. 1 point in ability modifier. So yeah, really not that big a deal. So we go next. We choose our training. So we're going to go athletics because we always do. I like intimidate for fire, and then endurance is always fun. We do that, and then as an Eladrin, I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to train in Arcana because Eladrin just get an extra skill, and I'm choosing Arcana on purpose, which I'll talk about later. And then when you're choosing your starting powers, for most classes in 4th edition, and you've seen me do this quite a few times, when you start your character at level 1, you choose 2 at-will powers, 1 encounter power, 1 daily power. And you normally have, even just if you're looking at the player's handbook, you normally have about 6 to 10 at-will powers, around 4 to 6 encounters, around 4 to 6 dailies to choose from. This has, if you're just going with what was in the Essentials book, all you have is Battle Guardian, which is, it talks about your Defender aura. We'll talk about that when we go to the character sheet. Effectively, the marking aspect of the fighter is different for the knight than other ones. It's made significantly more simple. Or, because I chose Eladrin, I have this thing, which is the Feywild Guardian. And this is the reason that I chose Eladrin, because I did want to show that despite the fact that this is significantly more streamlined, significantly less choice, you still have some choice. So normally Battle Guardian would basically be how you deal with enemies breaking your mark effectively. Feywild Guardian lets you do something a little bit different. Enemy subject to your defender are either shifts or makes an attack that targets an ally of yours but not you, or an ally who has an active defender aura. You teleport 2 squares to a square adjacent to the triggering enemy and make a melee basic attack against it. So the big difference between the two is this: you still make an attack. They still have to be next to you because your defender aura only affects targets next to you. You make a melee basic attack, and then if it misses, you still do strength mod damage. This just lets you teleport. So it's the only difference, and because we're a legend, that's what we're going to do. Now, that was your one kind of at-will attack power, is that, and you don't even attack with it. The knight itself is not built to use powers. It's built to make melee basic attacks. So instead of having to choose your power that you're going to use every turn when you attack, you just say, I attack them, and make the same attack every single time. Again, significantly less choice, but that was what it was designed to do. It was designed to streamline everything. When you get into combat, you know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to go up, you're going to attack someone, and then based on your attack, you can do other things. So these utility powers, these are stances. You can see Battle Wrath. You assume the Battle Wrath stance. Until the stance ends, you get a +2 power bonus to the damage rolls of basic attacks using a weapon. So the thing with the fighter is they had this ability to shift between stances as a minor action. And each stance would do something different. This one gives you extra damage. Glimmering Blade is exclusive to Eladrin. Until the stance ends, each time you hit an enemy with a melee basic attack using a weapon, you can teleport up to 2 squares to an unoccupied square adjacent to that enemy. If you guys know anything about me, I like teleportation. We're of course going to choose that stance. And then you also get one other stance. So if you wanted like this one, +1 bonus to attack rolls. Hammer hands. Whenever you hit an enemy with a melee basic attack using a weapon, you can use a free action to push the enemy a square and then shift the same distance. So you can push people. To make this as simple as possible, we're just going to do extra damage. So we do that. That is all the choices we make for powers. Now again, normally when you're building a 4E character, again, 2 at-will powers, 1 encounter, 1 daily. We don't choose any of that. We choose 2 stances and our guardian thing. And that's it. So again, significantly less choices so that it's easier for someone to literally just start playing the game. We go here. The next thing that you see is the first place that they show you on here is actually the Player's Essentials feats. Doesn't mean that we don't have racial feats or class feats. We still have those, but this is a subset of feats. These are your, remember I said they were kind of generic feats? These are a subset of generic feats that are specifically grouped into the Essentials group. All of these are feats that you could have without playing an Essentials character, but they took a bunch of feats, and these are the more simple ones, like Armor Finesse. Ignore the check penalty for wearing armor. If we go to like Cunning Stalker, gain combat advantage against enemies with no other adjacent creatures. All of these are very simple, kind of passive bonuses, or if they do give you a choice, it's a very, very simple, easy choice to do. I thought there was one. No, staff doesn't do anything, does it? Staff expertise. So like this one here, we're going to be using a staff. This one, you get +1 defeat bonus to the attack rolls of implement powers and weapon powers. So we're going to be using weapons. We're not using the staff as an implement. We're not casting through it. So this gives you extra attack rolls. And then when you make a range or area attack with a staff as an implement, doesn't matter for that. When you make a melee weapon attack with a staff, the weapon's reach for that attack is increased by 1. So this allows you to attack from a little bit further away. Always nice. And you're just more accurate. So we're going to do that to make things easy. We go next. Buy equipment. As I've said over and over and over again, you always buy Adventures Kit. Armor. We can actually go all the way up to plate armor. As you can see, it has a -2 check penalty, -1 speed penalty. I'm trying to remember what check penalty is. Here we go. Armor check penalty. Take this penalty all strength, dexterity, and constitution-based skill checks when you wear the armor. So basically, if you make a strength-based, dexterity-based, or constitution-based skill check, you get you have to take a -2 to do it. And again, there's a feat in there that can get rid of that, which we will probably take as we level up here. But I'm going to go, because again, this fighter is built for this, I'm going to buy some plate armor. And then for weapons, we are 100% going to go with... Where are you, staff? Where are you, staff? Oh, no, it's Q for quarterstaff. That's what it is. I'm going to get quarterstaff. Because now we effectively count as having a shield equipped, despite the fact that we don't. And I'm not going to change the picture right now, but we're going to call him... Let's see what random names they give us. I'm not going to be able to say that. Sariel. I like Sariel. Sariel. This is our Eladrin Knight. So we're going to open up the character sheet here real quick. So I'm going to show you guys what we're talking about here. And then I just have to go boom. Boom, boom. There. Okay, so character sheet. Simple enough. As you can see, 19 AC, Fort Reflex Will. Super easy. Speed is 5 because we have the armor penalty. Our melee basic attack, 1d8 plus 4, which is not a bad amount for a first level character. Then we have things here. So, Battle Guardian. We already know about that. Defender Aura, we just get that. Power Strike, another thing we didn't choose, we just get it. The Night Fighter stances, we did that. And then you choose a Night Defense, we have Spinning Deflection, and then Weapon Talent. We just all attacks, all weapon attacks, we get a +1 bonus. Again, passive things. And then Staff Expertise, we get some even more stuff. So we're going to go all the way down to here, and we're going to start seeing, we don't care about Bull Rush, we don't care about Grab, Opportunity Attack, we don't need to worry about. So Feywild Guardian, again, this is what replaced the Battle Guardian, and it just lets us teleport and make an attack. And then Power Strike. This is our one encounter power. And the way that works is you hit an enemy with a melee basic attack using a weapon. The target takes an extra weapon of damage from the triggering attack. So literally, as opposed to having complicated things that you need to do, like, well, this is an attack versus this, it's if you hit them, you can just add extra damage. And every encounter you can do it once. As we level up, we'll find out that changes. Excuse me, I got something in my throat. It's driving me nuts. Let me get a drink real quick. All right, much better, like that. So, let's keep on going. So as you can see, we have Second Wind, we have Face Up, we have the Defender Aura. Again, the Defender Aura is what replaces marking. Remember, the way marking worked before is anytime you hit an enemy with an attack, you can add a mark to them. But that requires you to actively remember, oh, I'm going to mark this person. It requires you to track who is marked and who is not. The Defender Aura simplifies everything. You activate an Aura 1 that lasts until you end it as a minor action or until they fall unconscious. Well, in the Aura, any enemy takes a -2 penalty to attack rolls, so it makes an attack that doesn't. It's marked, and it specifically says marked enemies are not subject to this because the way marking works is you can only have one mark on you at a time. So if you have two defenders in the party and they both mark the same target, whoever marks it last, that's the character that the mark stays for. This gets rid of that completely, and it's just an aura. You don't have to actively remember who's marked and who's not. It's anyone that's next to you. Aura 1 is basically every square next to you. So anyone that's next to you, as long as you use a minor action at the beginning of combat, because this lasts forever, at the beginning of combat, you can just activate this aura, and then you're golden. You don't have to worry about marking. And then our two stances. Stances work, basically you activate them and then they last until the end of combat or you end them. With this, because they're minor actions and they're at will, you can literally just change your stance every round if you want, but the stance will remain there as long as you have a minor action to activate it once during combat. So this is the knight. If you compare it to the fighters that we've built, it's significantly more simple. And it's going to get even more simple in a couple seconds here. What do you mean by that? Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. Excuse me. We're going to level up. So you're just going to go to 10. Level up. And see the choices we need to make. Choose a power. So, as you can see, you can use the fighter utility powers because you are still a fighter. You still qualify for them. But you again have special utility powers that are specifically designed for the knight. And as you can see, compared to the fighter utility powers, which is really big, This only gives you, normally it only give you 3. Again, because we're in Eladrin, we have a 4th one. So this effectively, you and one ally in the burst, you can basically switch places with someone as your move action, and you both just teleport, which I think is cool. So I'm just going to be choosing all the Eladrin stuff because I like it. Level 6, you get another utility power. And again, this one. So this one's an immediate interrupt. One enemy in the burst makes an attack roll against an ally you can see. The enemy takes a -2 penalty to their trigger attack roll. If the attack misses, you can pull the target 1 square. You cannot pull the target into difficult or hazardous terrain. So effectively, if an enemy within 3 squares of you attacks one of your allies, you can just shoop and pull, give them a, basically act as if they're kind of marked. And then if they miss from it, you get to pull them away from your ally. So another thing, pretty simple, pretty easy. 7th level, you get to choose another stance. These are the same stances you had before. Let's do Cleaving Assault. I think that's funny with, what's defending the line? Enemy slow. Cool, we'll do slowed. And then finally for 10th, we have Arcane Instincts. Close Burst 1. It's an immediate interrupt. You take Acid, Cold, Fire, Lightning, or Thunder. You take elemental damage. The target gains resist 10 to the triggering damage until the end of your next turn. So target is you and each ally in the burst, and the trigger is you take. So effectively, the way this works is if you take elemental damage, you and everyone next to you, every ally next to you, get resist 10 to the triggering damage type. So you take, someone hits you with a fireball, you immediately turn this on, and you get resist 10 to fire damage until the end of your next turn. So again, useful, but again, it doesn't require a whole lot of choice in it. It's, if this happens, you have this thing to do, and your only choice is, do you want to use it or not who do you want to use it on, where do you use it, anything like that. We have more feats to do. Just because this is easier, I'm going to take Armor Finesse, and then there's also Heavy Armor Agility, which ignores the speed penalty. I like those. Then we're going to go here. I think, because there was cool stuff. Use Longsword or Spear. Just focus superiority. They have these Power Strike, where, again, Power Strike is that thing that we had. Again, I've already done this, so I don't have to read through these. I just want Staff. So anytime you use Power Strike, target grants combat advantage to everyone until the end of your next turn. Very useful. And then I'm just looking for no resistance with combat challenge at attacks. So when you hit with an opportunity attack while using a shield, again, our staff counts as a shield. So we theoretically could do that. This would let us apply the shield bonus to our fortitude. Hard Fury. I'm just trying to find some easy stuff to do. So I could get it. Don't need that. Let's do Fey Escape. And then I still need one more. Let's go. Bonus to weapon attack rolls. Let's choose that. Okay, so go here. We're going to do Strength and Con because, again, everything uses either Strength or Constitution, so it's really easy. And then we get a weapon specialization. So we have this, which only works with heavy blades. We have this, which works with hammers, or we have this that uses staves. When you use Power Strike with the staff, you can push the target 2 squares and can shift 2 squares. So we're going to use that because we're already staff user. We're not going to worry about saving it. So we're going to open up the character sheet again. And then go here. Character viewer. All right, so we look at this, and I forgot to turn on. Here, let's turn on inherit bonuses real quick. See if they're gonna make me do this again. They are, because why would you open up a thing that is literally the exact same file name? So we have the inherit bonuses. Remember from last time, you see our speed is fixed. We don't have to worry about the check penalty anymore. Now our melee basic attack is 1d8 plus 8. Because we have all these enhancements to it. It's a plus 16 to its attack roll. And we have all these other things. But as you see, level 3 improved Power Strike. You can use Power Strike. It cuts it off here. It lets us use Power Strike twice per encounter. So instead of giving us a new encounter ability, they just let us use the same encounter ability again. You can see here, Night Combat Readiness. Just gain a plus 2 bonus to initiative. We didn't choose anything for this. We just got it. Weapon Mastery, gain plus 1 damage to weapon attack rolls. We just get this. Shield Block and Greater Combat Readiness. These are things that were just given to us. We never chose them. We just get to do this. And that's... You guys should start seeing the similarities between the Essentials series and 1D&D at this point. So you can see Power Strike. You can use Power Strike twice per encounter, but only once per turn. If we look at reaching where, defend the line, Shield Block. So this is Shield Block. This is the ability that we were just given. You must use this power with a shield. Well, our staff counts as a shield. An attack hits or misses you or an ally adjacent to you and deals damage. The character hit or miss by the triggering attack, so the person that gets this has to be next to you, and the damage dealt to the target is reduced by 1d10 plus your con. So this is an interrupt that lets you protect using your staff, which is cool. And then that's the arcane instance. So as you can see, so much of how this character plays is passive. Things like your melee basic attack. The reason it's a plus 15 is from all those different bonuses. The reason that you do plus 8 damage is all these different bonuses apply to it, but you don't have to figure any of that out. So going back to the idea of 1D&D is Essentials Part 2, when you look at what they've been doing with 1D&D, they choose your skills for you. And then they say, well, you can choose other things, just like when we're building the knight here. You have a subset of powers, utility powers, that you can choose for the knight from the Essentials book. But you still technically can choose knight utility powers. So you still have the option of doing the old stuff, but we've streamlined the process and given you significantly less choice. That is what 1D&D is. Everything we have seen thus far is remove choice, remove kind of the paralysis of too many choices, and tell people how they're going to play their character. And I mentioned this when I was doing my D&Duns on the Rogue, the Ranger, and was it the Bard? I think it was the expert classes. Yeah, it was the Bard. Was everything about this felt like they were going, no, this is how you play this character. We are going to force you to play this in a certain way. And it felt really bad to me, because I'm like, well, what's the point of D&D if you don't get to make your own characters? Like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then as I looked into it, Mona, and I talked with other people, this is Essentials. The Essentials line was put in near the end of 4th edition to try and bring back the customer, the potential new customers that they lost, because 4th edition had gotten really complicated. And not only was it really complicated, but the way most people got into it was through because it was $10 a month to get access to every book in the entire game, or you could spend anywhere between $30 and $50 per book to get access to some of the things that you wanted. You really had to know which book was going to give you the options you wanted, and some of the options were in Dragon magazine, and being the $10 a month to D&D Insider also gave you access to both Dungeon and Dragon magazine, which were great. I miss them. Dragon, I think it was called Dragon Plus, was their new version of it. It sucked in comparison. Dragon magazine was amazing. But anyway, so I'm gonna drink again. Everything we're seeing about 1D&D is trying to take choices away from players. And Crawford has talked about this. The reason that they're doing this is 5th edition has a bit of a rules bloat problem. Now, if you ask like a Pathfinder purist, they will say, no, 5th edition is far too simplistic. It doesn't have enough choice. It has plenty of choice. It just doesn't have needless choices that don't matter. Every choice you make in current 5th edition matters, will change how your character plays. 9 out of 10 choices you make in Pathfinder don't matter. Because you'll make one choice and then that choice forces you to make 2 or 3 other choices later on. Otherwise, that choice is a waste because it becomes useless without the feat trees and things like that. So, 1D&D is effectively trying to counter that. And as much as I have kind of decried the idea of removing choice and stuff like that, it is, from a training perspective, it is essential if you want to introduce someone to something new that you need to start them very simply. When I run new players through a D&D 5th edition game, for example, I construct their first session to ensure that there is at least one role-playing moment and there is some link to there's some aspect of combat that we get to deal with. And when they go through their first combat, their first turn, I tell them, I don't tell them everything that you do. I go, okay, you have 3 things that you get to do every turn. You have a move action, you have an action, and then you have a bonus action. So for your character, let's start off, where do you want to move? You have 30 feet of movement, where do you want to move? I want to go here. Okay, good. Now your action can be a lot of different things, but because of your character, let's say they're playing a fighter. You're a fighter, you attack stuff. So you're probably going to want to use that move to get close to someone, and then attack. You're going to use the attack action, you roll a d20, and then you add your attack modifier with this particular weapon. You've got a longsword. So you can see where it says +5 there on your character sheet. That's what you're going to roll that's what you're going to add to your d20. So go ahead and roll a d20. Cool. Add +5 to that. Okay, so you got a 19 total. That's enough to hit. Next to it, you can see a damage section where it says 1d8 +4. That is how much damage you do. So find the d8. It's the one that looks like 2 pyramids shoved together. Roll it. See the number? Now add 4 to that. I don't know why a first level character has an 18 in strength, but we're going with it. And that's all I tell them. I don't talk about it, and they go, well, what about the bonus action? Well, you don't really have a bonus action thing you can do right now, so we'll deal with that later. And that's what their first round of combat. The second round, I will start talking about more interesting things. Well, if you and an ally can get on opposite sides, there's an optional rule called flanking, where you can get advantage on the attack roll. Or other things like that. Like you start very, very simply and then expand. So the Essentials line in 4th edition was quite literally essential. If you had a new player coming into a 4th edition game, giving them an Essentials character was really, really useful. Because compared to all the crazy stuff that you could do with a just base version of 4th edition character, where you've got, like, especially once you start getting into anything above level 5, you generally have 2 or 3 different encounter powers, 2 or 3 different daily powers, and your at-wills, a bunch of utilities, and there's so many different things that you can do that it really takes someone that understands their character well to play it well. For D&D 5th edition, again, it's not difficult for me because I am a trainer. Like, this is literally what I used to get paid to do. It's not difficult for me to kind of ease someone in to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons because I've done it so many times. And it's what I do. I look at things and I know how to simplify them. That is a rare trait I have found. Not everyone can do that. So, the Essentials versions, again, when I played 4th edition, we had Essentials characters playing right alongside regular characters constantly. And for the first tier, for the heroic tier, so levels 1 to 10, they really didn't feel underpowered at all. They felt really, really good. And they were significantly more simple, but they still felt like they were making an impact on battle in that without having to worry about all these different powers in that. And it wasn't until... so the way that Essentials characters works is as you level up, when you go to Paragon Path, you theoretically can choose any Paragon Path. But your Essentials character has a Paragon Path called, like for the Knight, there was Paragon Knight and Epic Knight. And it basically fit along the same thing, where it would just give you powers and it would upgrade existing powers. You would get additional uses of your encounter powers. A lot of Essentials didn't really have too many daily powers because it was just easier to give them encounter powers, and then again they didn't have to track whether or not they'd use their daily powers that day. So again, it was about simplicity. So using the Essentials line was really great, but once you started getting into Paragon tier, they started becoming less useful because despite the fact that they're getting bonuses and they're still doing a similar amount of damage, the most overpowered thing in 4th edition is teamwork. Because understanding what the rest of your team can do and making sure that your characters kind of complement them makes them massively overpowered. Which I don't, quote unquote, I don't consider quote unquote overpowered. It just meant that you could take on things that, according to kind of the math of this is a balanced encounter, a party that cooperated and gelled together well could take on stuff that should have been deadly encounters for them without breaking a sweat, just because they would understand how they all played together. And that, again, that was one of my favorite things about 4th edition, was knowing your party and working with them was significantly more important than it is in 5th edition, than it was in 3rd edition. Like, party cohesion in 4th edition is massive. And because the Essentials line were much more straightforward, you know, I make an attack, I add extra damage to it, because they didn't have anywhere near as much of that utility aspect, they became less and less useful, because the thing that was doing the most benefit for the party was not the raw damage numbers, it was all the other things that the characters could do. But in 4th edition, the most common tier of play was heroic tier, generally between the levels of 1 and 10, which is heroic tier. If we go into 5th edition again, the most popular 5th edition levels to play, where most characters play, is tier 2, actually, which is between levels 5 and 10. And that's where I'm thinking the 1 D&D characters are going to shine the most. And that's where they're going to feel the strongest. despite the fact that they have less customization, despite the fact that they're significantly more simple to run. In that little area, they're going to feel really good, and they should still be able to play with base 5th edition characters if this follows the Essentials route. And so basically, what will happen in my mind, what will happen is when 1D&D comes out, which is, they may try to stick with 1D&D. It's a massively stupid name, and I am almost going to guarantee they will change it to something else. But players are going to call it 5.5. A lot of players called the Essential Series 4.5. And 3.5 was not something that Wizards of the Coast came up with. That was a player thing. I can't even remember what Wizards referred to the new thing one, but 3.5 is a player thing that I think Wizards might have eventually adopted, but is all by players. So anyway, when 5.5 officially comes out, the reason they keep saying it's backwards compatible because it's going to be. The 1D&D version of everything, the 5.5 version of everything, is just going to be a significantly more streamlined, simplified approach to playing to encourage new players to come in. Now, the thing that makes me worried about this is 5th edition currently does not have a player problem. And what I mean by that is 3rd edition... 3rd edition was one of the first big mistakes that Wizards of the Coast made with D&D. And before all the 3rd edition purists start screaming at me, the mistake was they had created something that a decent part of their fan base wanted. They wanted something crunchy. They wanted something complex. But it wasn't their entire fan base. Like I said, 3rd edition was the first time we saw people deciding, no, I'm not going to upgrade with D&D. I'm going to stay playing 2nd edition. Or, you know what, I'm just going to go back to 1st edition or original did a D&D. That was the first time we saw this big split because they did something for a small part of their community or a smaller part of their community. And that part of the community loved it. But the rest of them didn't. And so they stopped playing. In addition to that, and that wasn't the mistake. That was them trying something new, and it worked pretty well because 3rd edition was still relatively popular. It was just the start of the downfall. What happened was, from original D&D all the way up through the beginnings of 3rd edition, you always had new players showing up over and over and over and over again. That was how the hobby kept growing. And they had started, way back in the 80s, they had started coming up with different ways to get more eyes on the products. You had the cartoon in the 80s, as well as like the Gold Box series of games where people could literally play D&D on their computer. It wasn't the same, it wasn't nearly as customizable, but it gave people, you know, a little bit of a hook, and that was a way for people to get in. We get into 3rd edition, they started having really, really popular games. Baldur's Gate was a 2nd edition thing, but Throne of Baal, the expansion, actually started adding in some 3rd edition aspects because people were liking it, and 3rd edition works really well for video games because it is a video game, in the idea that there's a rule for everything. And that's how video games have to work. You cannot do something that the programmers didn't already think you were going to do. And that's kind of what 3rd edition is built on, is they made a rule for everything so that you never really could do something that they hadn't already planned for you to do. And so despite the fact that we have things like Neverwinter Nights, Icewind Dale 2, there's a few other really, really popular video games, but Neverwinter Nights was definitely the biggest. They used 3rd edition. They were a great infection vector. 3rd edition was so complicated. Temple of Elemental Evil was another one that wasn't nearly as popular as it should have been, but was awesome and used 3rd edition rules. As much as there was so many more ways to get into D&D, the new players began drying up for a couple different reasons. One, 3rd edition was really, really complicated. Two, D&D finally started having some competition in White Wolf. And that had actually started a little bit in second edition. That was one of the things that influenced third edition. White Wolf was the publisher that made Vampire the Masquerade. And it became really, really big in the 90s. And so now Wizards of the Coast actually had competition. Not that there weren't other role-playing games in the 80s and the early 90s and stuff like that, but generally what would happen, you would start with D&D, and then you would go to other RPGs, Mutants and Masterminds, stuff like that. Because D&D wasn't giving you exactly what you wanted to try something different. White Wolf was pulling in new role players, because the White Wolf system is, the Vampire the Masquerade system is remarkably simplistic, especially compared to third edition. And if you ever read any of the Vampire the Masquerade or Mage the Ascension, any of the World of Darkness books, the books themselves are not written like a player's handbook or something like that, where lore, mechanics, and they very clearly separate them, where it's like, here's some lore for you, here's the mechanics that you need to play, here's some more lore, here's the mechanics that you need to play. And they do that all the way through 5th edition. Like, if you look, every character starts off with 3 different sections of lore, and then here's mechanics. And that's how it's always worked. The World of Darkness books do not work that way. You pick up one of the World of Darkness books, it is lore with mechanics sprinkled in there. So you can't really kind of skip the lore and go right to mechanics, because it's peppered in everywhere. So for someone like me that tends to look at a new book and just skip through stuff so I can figure out exactly how to build a character, how to run a game, and things like that, World of Darkness books are mind-numbingly confusing for me. And I've got half a dozen of them. And I've never made it through one of them, just because I haven't had the time yet. Not that I don't think they're amazing. They are. I love Mage the Ascension. I think it's cool. The rest of them are good too, but Mage the Ascension is my... I want that so bad. I want to play a Mage the Ascension game so bad. But because of that, they actually could target a new market. People that were really interested in... Anne Rice books and things like that. They could pick up the Vampire the Masquerade core book, and it would feel very familiar to them, because it was just like reading a regular book. And it was really interesting, and then they would bleed in this mechanics, and they would learn how to play while they were being entertained. It's a really effective way to do it. It's just not something I'm used to. And so they had their first competition, and because it was significantly easier to get into Vampire the Masquerade, like, building a character was much faster, much more simple. There was much less choice you had to make compared to third edition, where building a character could take upwards of an hour, depending on what you were doing and how complicated you want to get. I've seen people build characters for 2 or 3 hours, and third edition really heavily incentivized you building a character at first level that you had planned at least 7 or 8 levels ahead. So in addition to building your first level character, you also had to make plans, because if you wanted to choose a prestige class, well, prestige classes required you to do certain things, and a lot of them required you to multi-class a certain way and to take certain feats and things like that. So if you wanted to be a blade singer, you had to ensure that you were multi-classing fighter and some kind of spellcaster. You had to make sure that you were taking the dodge feat, because that was essential. You could not take the Blade Singer prestige class without having dodge. You needed a basic attack bonus above a certain level, and then you also needed to cast spells of a certain level. So if you wanted to create a Blade Singer, which is a really, really cool class in 3rd edition, it's super, super fun. You had to plan your character from level 1, and you had to plan them, because you wouldn't be able to take your prestige class until minimum like 7 or 8 is generally the first time you could start looking at prestige classes. In third edition, you could not solo class. Generally after about level 11 or 12, you just stop gaining features for your class, and the only thing that improves is like your basic attack bonus or things like that. So multi-classing was effectively required in third edition, and to multi-class correctly, you had to plan really, really ahead. So what this did was it completely cut off new players. New players could not start into D&D third edition unless they had someone that was willing to hold their hand and teach them every single aspect. So friendly local game stores became essential for D&D's growth because you had to have a place where someone could go that had no idea what they were doing, where they would be surrounded by veterans. 3.5 comes out, and instead of simplifying things to have a new infection vector for new players, they made them more complicated. They added more classes, more prestige classes. They made some quality of life changes to just make the game run a little bit smoother, but those quality of life changes only really helped base third edition players because they already knew the system, and so the quality of life changes just made a few things a little easier. It was still a massively complicated game that became more complicated. So fourth edition was Wizards of the Coast learning from that problem, which was, okay, it was too complicated. New players couldn't get in. Fourth edition was significantly easier to get into. And building a fourth edition character, especially once you started getting D&D Insider, which was super, super cheap, massively user-friendly, and available anywhere with an internet connection. Fourth edition was the easiest version of D&D to get into ever. Easier to get into fifth edition until D&D Beyond came out. Because of the online character builder, because of everything else that you can do, fourth edition was the easiest version to get into. But then they found a new problem, which was choice paralysis. Yes, it was really easy to get into. They didn't add any more choices as they started adding new powers and things like that. It wasn't they were asking you to make more choices. They were giving you different things to choose from. But you still, when you built a character, you started with 2 at-will powers, 1 encounter power, 1 daily power. Super simple. Every level, you would generally choose 1 power, and it was either a utility or an attack power. Every other level, you would get a feat. Again, none of this changed from the first iteration of D&D 4th edition all the way until the last book was published. But what they found was giving players so many choices made them worried about making the wrong choice. Partially because of 3rd edition and the tons of games that were built in the D20 license. If you made the wrong choice, you had a useless character. It was remarkably difficult to make a useless character in 4E, but and they had mechanics built in where if you did make the wrong choice, every level you could replace a power from a previous level. So it was, you could fix your character every level. It was super easy. But they had this choice paralysis, and so they created the Essentials line to deal with that. Unfortunately, at that point, because of the 3rd edition purists and Pathfinder was just starting to kind of pull over all the 3rd edition purists, 4th edition had started getting a bad name, and Essentials effectively just came too late. It wasn't able to overcome the bad press effectively that the purists had created. So they go to 5th edition, which again worked very similar to 4th edition. Create a very easy infection point where it's super, super easy for players to get in. The SRD made it one of the easiest versions of D&D to get in because you didn't have to spend any money. So there was no barrier to entry for money. Creating an SRD character, there was very little choice you had to make because they only gave you one subclass. They didn't allow you to use feats. It was really, really simple. But we're now, 8-9 years into D&D 5th edition. Now, with things like D&D Beyond, you can buy individual classes. You can buy individual feats, so you don't have to spend, like, if you get the legendary bundle now, which is everything, I think it's like $1,200. It is an ungodly expensive hobby to get into because it gives you absolutely everything, and it gives it to you at a discount too, which is terrifying. That's the discounted price. If anyone has not been keeping track of how much money you have spent on D&D books, go and look at what a legendary bundle costs and start realizing that you have spent, over $1,000 on this hobby, which again, not a new thing. Third edition players spent that much money. Second edition players might have. First edition players didn't. And then fourth edition players, obviously. But you can now buy everything piecemeal. So if you just go, damn, I really want to play a wildfire druid, well, you can do that. You literally, druid is free. Wildfire druid costs a couple bucks. You are now playing the exact character you want. You have a really simple to use online character builder. It's very, very easy. However, they're running into the same problem that 4th edition had, choice paralysis. And it looks like they're making the same choice they made last time, which is, okay, we're going to introduce the Essentials line. We're going to introduce Baby's first D&D character. And I hate to call it that because it's a very condescending thing to do, but that is what this feels like. This is D&D 5e simple. This is D&D 5e without as many choices. The one thing that fights against that I know people are going to say is like, what about feats? Feats are now not optional. Yes, but you can take the same feat every single level, which is the increase ability score. So, yes, technically you have more feats, but if you look at the feats themselves, the feats tend to be a little bit more simplistic, a little bit more piecemeal. 1 D&D feats are not the feats in D&D 5th edition. They don't make quite as big a change to how your character plays, with a few rare exceptions. A lot of them are things like, well, instead of using an action to do this, you can use it as a bonus action. Stuff like that. And again, just like with the Essentials line before, the Essentials characters really only worked super well in levels 1 to 10. I think 1 D&D characters are really only going to work super well up to around level 12, which is when most D&D campaigns end. So it really doesn't matter about the epic feats or whatever they're called, and the fact that you don't gain subclass abilities past level 14 and stuff like that. That's not really going to matter that much because most people are never going to get that high. They're going to stop around level 10 to 12. And in that level range, these 1 D&D characters are going to be able to hold their own against regular D&D characters, or regular 5th edition characters. But they're going to be significantly easier to play. In that level range, you only get 2 feats. If you get all the way up to level 12, you might get a 3rd. But that's it. So even if we want to argue that the feats are making things more complicated, technically yes, but you only get to choose them twice, and choosing that improvability score only twice works really well, because most players, unless you roll your stats, you cannot start with higher than a 16 in any stat. So at 4th level, going from 16 to 18 in your primary ability score is useful. At 8th level, going from 18 to 20 is really useful. So as much as, yes, you still can be complex with these characters in the same way you can with an Essentials character, the way that it's built, and I will almost guarantee when 1 D&D comes out, the recommendation for feats, they will have recommended feats for each class, and one of the recommended feats is always going to be the ability score improvement. because it's simple, it's passive, it's easy, and that's what the whole line is. Do I think that this is a horrible, disgusting thing and it's ruining D&D? Absolutely not. Again, I was not particularly fond of the Essentials line in 4th edition. I felt that it was basic, and I was new to 4th edition. I was a baby. I had never played D&D off of a computer before. 4th edition was my first tabletop experience in D&D. And even then, I didn't particularly like the Essentials line because it just didn't feel as fun. I'd been playing so many computer based RPGs that used either the 3rd edition or the 2nd edition. Again, my first introduction to D&D as a concept was Dark Sun Shattered Lands, which was a video game of AD&D 2nd edition Dark Sun. And I got very, very good at creating really interesting characters, even in the framework of a video game where you can't make that many interesting characters. And then Neverwinter Nights, I'd create weird... I started Neverwinter Nights, I kid you not, I started characters on Neverwinter Nights probably 3 or 4 dozen times. I had that many different characters that I built. I never got past the first chapter. I own Enhanced Edition Neverwinter Nights. I have it. I have never gotten past the first chapter where you have to go out and get the Waterdavian creatures. I have never gotten past that part. Anytime I have played Neverwinter Nights, because every time I get to like level 5 or 6 and I start doing cool stuff, I go, you know what would be really cool? What if? And I go back and I create a new character. So, again, I was not super thrilled with the Essentials line for me personally, but it was really, really useful for introducing new players. And there were actually some really cool things to play. Like, I've played a Hexblade Warlock, which is an Essentials character, and they're actually really fun to play. But they're very, very simple. There's not a lot of choice. Every Hexblade Warlock, for the most part, is going to feel like another one. The big choice you make when playing a Hexblade is what your pact is, like Infernal Pact versus Fey Pact. And it actually changes the weapon that you use, because you get a special weapon. Like Fey Pact gets a rapier, Infernal Pact, I think they got a heavy blade, so they got basically like a broadsword. But it also changed your counterattack power, which was the big thing that you would do. And your at-will powers. All of that was based off of there. So if you chose different packs, you technically could play slightly different characters. But for the most part, they played almost identically. Compared to our 2 different knights that, again, use the same base class in just a different race, and yet were 2 vastly different playstyles. One that was built around grappling and charging at people. The other one that was built around just dragging as many people to them as often as they could and getting them to attack them. Like 2 very, very different play styles from the exact same class. Doesn't work for Essentials. And I think the same is going to be true about 1D&D. You, if you're using entirely 1D&D characters, you are not going to see multiple characters of the same class in the same party, because they're going to feel redundant. Whereas, again, I played... I did the Adventurers League for years at the convention circuit. So effectively, the way that worked was you would go to a convention, and conventions would have all these different events that you'd have to sign up for. Some of them would charge, some of them wouldn't, but you would sign up for it. But except for I think 1 or 2 conventions I ever went to, which were really cool, when you signed up for it, it didn't ask you for the character you were playing or anything like that. You just got a ticket to go to that event. And so when you showed up at the table, you had no idea what other characters people would have. And something that was extremely common in the Adventurers League was you would have 3 or 4 different characters ready to play at a moment's notice. So if you sat down at a table and going, well, I was planning on playing this, like for me, I would sit down at the table and go, well, I was planning on playing my monk for this. Well, we already have, we already have a lot of people doing a lot of damage in that. We need someone that can take a hit. And I would go, okay, well, I'll go get my paladin then. Or the entire party is all melee focused characters. Okay, I'll bring my sorcerer warlock, multi-class, who's built for range. So that was really really common. But even then, like, I would sit down, and it wasn't very often I sat down and had another monk. But fairly regularly there'd be one or two different rangers in addition to me, or we'd had a couple different, because my paladin character is created for Ravenloft. The Ravenloft and paladins go hand in hand. So you'd have a couple different Pippa paladins. You still felt very unique in 3rd edition, even if you were playing the same character, because choosing your subclass could drastically change how you play the character. Or we might have, I've had ones where we had 2 druids. I've had ones where we had 2 Circle of the Moon druids, and they still felt very, very different because they just chose different animals to turn into. I don't see that being nearly as common in 1D&D. 1D&D, if you show up to a table and you have the same character as someone else, someone's going to change. You know, that whole, you know, meme where Peter and Lois come out and they're both wearing the same dress. All right, one of us has got to change. I think that's what 1D&D is going to be like, because everything about 1D&D feels streamlined, simplified, and meant to be a way to get new players into the game, which again is not a bad thing. And I think if we want 5th edition to continue growing the way it has been for years now, we need a new infection vector. 5th edition D&D is complex to a point. It's still very easy to build a character, and I can do it in 10 minutes. But the sheer amount of choice is paralyzing for a lot of players. That's why when I introduce a new player to D&D, I mean, I recently did it with one of my players in one of my D&D games. She's a friend of a friend, and got introduced last December because she played in my Library Cats one-shot. And I just said, hey, do you want to join this campaign? I need another player. She's like, yeah, sure, but I don't know anything. And so I built her character for her. We had conversation. I said, well, let's talk about what kind of character do you want to play and what kind of things. So she started describing things. I said, okay, what if we did this? Does this sound fun? Does this sound like an interesting character you could play? And we created her character that way. But I built it, and I didn't give her a ton of choices. It was all, what do you want the character to feel like? What is your idea of what the character is? And we didn't talk anything about D&D at all until after we'd kind of created this character that she thought was really cool. And then I went, okay, let's turn your ideas of how you think this character should feel into mechanics. We're going to do this, 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 and this. It's a really effective way, and she started at, I think, level 6th or 7th level, which is generally not what you want to do with a new player. But I was able to ease her into it, and she does perfectly well. She still has stuff that she needs to learn, but so does everybody that starts playing D&D. We have another player in that exact game that has been playing for years and still doesn't understand how to play their character. And that's perfectly fine. It's a learning experience. So yeah, I realize this is a really long video, but this is the first time I've been able to record early enough that I'm not playing Fight the Clock, and I really wanted to get this idea out there. 1D&D is most definitely D&D 5.5, and the purpose of 1D&D is to be a new infection vector for new players. The reason it's quote-unquote backwards compatible is for the people that want a highly customizable, relatively complex RPG, they can use a 5th edition character, and it works perfectly fine. For players that want to get the mechanics out of the way and just want to sit down at the table and play and not have to be a tactical mastermind and not have to worry about, well, do I need to take this feat or that feat? They're going to play 1D&D characters and be very, very happy. And that's where I see this going. Now, the one thing that worries me about this is the fact that the Essentials characters had different names. Again, when we picked Sariel's class, we didn't pick fighter, we picked knight. So it was very, very clear, despite the fact that officially the class is called fighter, or knight parentheses fighter, because they are a fighter. Naming the character or naming the class something different, despite the fact that it's effectively a subclass of fighter, made it significantly easier for people to understand. Oh, I'm a knight. Okay, you're an Essentials character. I'm a little bit worried as of right now because 1D&D is using the exact same class names as basic 5th edition. So if you go, well, I'm playing a 5e ranger and I'm playing a 1 ranger or whatever it is, I think that's going to cause some confusion, and I think that's going to cause people to assume, and again, that's why a lot of people are assuming 1D&D is D&D 6th edition. It's not. In no way, shape, or form is it D&D 6th edition. It has never been D&D 6th edition. It was never going to be 6th edition. Every time they move to a new edition, things change massively. Aside from going from original D&D to quote-unquote first edition, there weren't massive changes, but there are enough that a original D&D character would not be able to play with a first edition character very well. There's enough differences it doesn't work. We go from first edition to second edition. Second edition introduced THAC0. Second edition introduced the 4 roles effectively. You had fighters, rogues, wizards, and clerics, or something similar to that, where you had 4 different flavors, and then the rest of the classes were in there. Like barbarians were technically under the fighter role kind of thing. I can't remember what they were called. Third edition introduced massive changes to how multiclassing works, where every time you level up, you choose what class you're going to level up into, as opposed to previous ones where your choice at first level is what happened, unless you were a human, and then you could dual class, but that was a massive change. 4th edition, everything changed. 5th edition, everything changed. 1D&D is not changing 99% of everything. It's not 6th edition. There's not enough change in it to be 6th edition. It is D&D 5.5. It is an infection vector for new players, meant to let them be able to play with experienced players that have base 5th edition characters that are very complex and very interesting, without them feeling like they're at a disadvantage. It is D&D Essentials Part 2. And again, they have described that specifically. Crawford has been on record stating, we want to get rid of choice paralysis. That is exactly what Essentials was designed for. This is Essentials Part 2, and it's not a bad thing. The rest of quote-unquote 1D&D is going to work perfectly fine with 5th edition, with a few things that are going to cause some issues. Things like the 2-weapon fighting change is going to cause some issues, because base 5th edition characters using the new 2-weapon fighting rules are going to be massively changed in how everything works, and it messes with the action economy. So something like that, there's going to have to be some sort of resolution so that you can play with both rule sets. But that's what the playtest is there for. So, yeah, I hope you guys don't mind me rambling. But again, I haven't been able to record early enough to do something like this. And again, this is something that is shown up in other videos. Everyone is talking about doom and gloom and everything about D&D, and the whole thing about WotC's now trying to take royalties off of people. They're not. Anyone that claims that Wizards of the Coast is trying to take money from content creators doesn't know what they're talking about. Again, you have to make $750,000 a year before royalties become a thing. And again, that's less than 20 groups. With the thousands upon thousands of people creating D&D 5th edition content, 20 of them, less than 20, might have to give up a portion of their sales back to D&D, which is the only reason they have jobs. It's not that big a deal. Is it kind of scummy? To me, I don't even see it as scummy. To me, it just makes sense. if you're making that much money off of something that you didn't create, it makes sense. Like again, I worked in the entertainment industry for a little while, and I plan to make a career there. Royalties are just a thing. Like you wanna use a play that you didn't write, you pay for it. You want to use music that you didn't write, you pay for it. Over and over again, everything in the entertainment industry is whoever created the base thing, despite the fact that you're creating a new story on top of it, like creating a soundtrack for a movie. If you use pre-written songs, or even if you don't use pre-written songs, you have people write stuff for the movie, you are still taking something that they created and telling an entirely different story than what they created it for. So yes, it's transformative and it's interesting, but you still pay for it. And most movies just license songs that work well. And the same is true about scripts and everything. Again, the high schools and stuff like that. What is it called? MTI, I think, Musical Theater International. That's who you get all of your scripts through, and they all have the exact same looking scripts. I still have a couple of my scripts from MTI that I got to keep after doing shows. Normally you don't, because you have to return the scripts, which means you're not allowed to write. You're not allowed to write in them in pen or anything like that. You have to use pencil, and you have to erase everything, or else you get charged for it. You license plays. You license them so much that when high schools do things like West Side Story, they're not allowed to get rid of some of the bad language in it. That is a violation of the copyright that you paid for. You're not allowed to switch around songs, because in the stage version of West Side Story, the songs "Cool" and "Officer Krupke" are in different places than they are in the 1950s or 60s movie. They switched where Officer Krupke and "Cool" are because they felt that it made more sense. You're not allowed to do that. That's specifically when you get your contract to be able to perform that show. You are told you are specifically not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to add the Sharks into the America scene, because in the stage show, the "I want to be in America, okay by me in America, everything free in America, for a small fee in America," that song, in the movie, it is kind of an argument between the Sharks, who are the boy Puerto Ricans, and their girls. In the stage show, it is the Shark girls just separate into two camps, and they kind of fight amongst themselves, and the Sharks aren't there at all. Yeah, like this idea that if you want to make something really cool and interesting, but somebody else already you're building on someone else's stuff, the fact that you have to pay them, to me, I'm surprised it didn't happen earlier. And I mean, DM's Guild was kind of like that, where you did give them a cut, but DM's Guild gave creators a better deal than literally any other product I've ever seen. We got 50%, and the people that made it and the people that created the website that you sell it on had to split the other 50%. Never heard of that ever. Generally, the people that are in charge of the IP and the platform that you're going will take the lion's share every single time. So yeah, people that are freaking out about it, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just trying to get click views. One D&D is D&D Essentials Part 2. And while, again, I'm not super thrilled with it, now that I can see it for what it is, I think I might be a little bit more comfortable with it. The piecemeal way that they're putting it out there is next to useless, because they're not giving enough of the system to be able to playtest most of it. Which is another thing that kind of leans into my idea of one D&D is D&D Essentials Part 2. Because the only way that this is representative of the full product is if they're intending one D&D characters to be played alongside 5th edition characters using 5th edition rules and everything like that. So everything about this is one D&D is D&D Essentials. And D&D Essentials, if it wasn't for the 3rd edition purists literally burning books, like there are videos, I don't know if they exist anymore, but I remember seeing videos of people burning their 4th edition books when D&D Next was announced, and it pissed me off because I didn't own any of the books and I wanted them, and I'm like, if you don't want your books, I will take them. But yeah, like if it wasn't for the 3rd edition purists pissing and moaning and the power of internet anonymity, the Essentials line would have been the exact thing that 4th edition needed to go for another 3, 4, 5 years. And Pathfinder would have never become the best-selling RPG for a year and 9 months. It never would have happened because 4th edition would have still been releasing books. Not that Pathfinder is bad or evil or anything. It just, 4th edition was not nearly as bad as people thought. And 1D&D is not nearly as bad as people are making it out to be. And we are seeing literally the same people that destroyed 4th edition are now destroying 1D&D. Again, the argument of, well, OSR, that's an edition purist right there. That someone was like, well, this is the dumb version of D&D. You should play the good version of D&D, which is OSR. Nope, you're a purist. You're intentionally trying to tank something that you don't like, just because you're angry that the thing you do like is not popular. And that's not okay. Yeah. Anyway, that's all for me today. I hope everyone has a wonderful Christmas. I normally do like a gift haul. This year has been really rough on my family due to house repairs and stuff like that. So I may or may not have a haul video this year, but I do have something that I'm definitely showing tomorrow, because it wasn't something that was purchased for me. It was something that was handmade for me, and it's super, super cool. So I'll be showing that off along with, if I get anything. I mentioned this to my therapist when I was going, yeah, Christmas is probably going to be a little light for us this year. And my therapist is like, oh, I'm sorry about that. That must be very upsetting. I'm like, I'm 34 years old. I have had 33 Christmases where I've gotten plenty of presents. I've been poor my entire life, so plenty of presents a lot of the time was like 2 or 3 per kid. But that's still perfectly fine. So if I have one Christmas where it's just, one present and then again something that was handmade for me, I'm perfectly fine with that. It's not going to ruin my day or anything like that. So anyway, that's all for me today. I'll see you guys next time. All right, bye-bye.